We will now be covering the implementation of a linked list. And I actually went over what a linked list is in my previous tutorial, where I talk about the conceptual aspect of it and how we can think about a linked list. And if you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend you watch that video before you go on to the implementation of a linked list in Java, because if you don't have a solid foundation, you're not going to understand what the hell is going on here, because I'm just going to be building on the previous knowledge, which I assume you already have. So, some things that you have to keep in mind is what a node is, and you have to have your basic understanding of classes or object-oriented programming nailed down. So let's go ahead and begin this implementation of a linked list. So when we go and create a linked list, they basically have nodes, which are pieces of data. So here, I split each node up into two portions, and basically the first portion has the index value, so 0, 1, 2, 3. The first node right here is the head node, and the last node is called the tail node. And the second part of the node, which is right here, has the data value. So every single node points to the data value of the second node, and the second points to the third, and so on and so forth. So it's chained. So let's go ahead and create a linked list, which we can add nodes, we can traverse through the nodes and view them and count the number of nodes there are. So how do we do this? So I have a node class right here. This right here is a class, and we have two instance variables within the class, and these two are going to help us determine what the data of the specific node is, so the value in here, and the node next is an instance variable of the class, which basically tells us whatever node we are on, the node or current node that we're on dot next will equal or point to the second node's data, which is in here. So let's go ahead and begin. So keep this in mind, and the reason why I have this commented out is because if we have this constructor right here in our linked list, class where we make the methods themselves, we're going to have to pass in some data value, and that's going to mess up our entire code because we don't want to add values like that. And this will make sense when I go over making the actual node objects themselves. So let's begin. So I have a linked list class right here. This code, yes, it seems very daunting, but just bear with me. There is a lot to understand here, and it is complicated. If you do not understand, just keep on watching this video over and over again, and sooner or later it will click, I promise you. So these two methods right here are source codes that I found on Google. We have an insert method right here, and this basically lets us create a node and add it to the linked list. So we have the object variable node head, and head, of course, is the head node right here, and we're going to set that in our conditional statement. So we have to have a few conditions that must be met in order to create this head node, and I will be covering that in just a little bit. But first of all, remember the class that we had, node? Well, remember the values, data and next. Basically, we're creating an object of the node within this insert method right here. And this node.data just utilizes the class-specific variables, and it sets the data equal to some data, so some value that we pass in when we're utilizing this insert method. And then we have node.next is equal to null. And all this means is that the next node is just equal to nothing, because we don't know if that exists yet or not. So we have a conditional statement. Now, what does this conditional statement mean? So we check if head is null. So this checks if there is in fact a value of head or not. If there isn't a head node, then we create the head as some node. But what happens if we already have some head node. Let's say, for example, we have these nodes created. We have this initialized to a head node. So the head node is pointing to this node right here. What happens in that case? Well, we're going to create some node object called n. We could have named this anything we wanted. So this is just a temporary variable. And this is going to be set to head. And inside of this for loop, we're going to traverse, or we're going to go through every single value in our linked list, and it's going to check, okay, so as long as the node variable .next or n.next is not null, so if there is in fact another node after that, then we set the node is equal to n.next. So we set that node pointing to the next node's data. And then we have this second next n.next here because we now set that next node to our node variable. And intuitively, this does make sense because if we did not have this value right here, we're just going to have these two values right here, and it's no longer going to know what n.next is because we never update that variable. This just enables us to insert a node into our linked list. So if we added another node, all it would do is it would make another node, and within that node's data, we have 4 as the index and some data that we pass into here. So the first if statement in here just checks if there is in fact a node. If there's no node, we set the very first one to head, and then we move on from there. Let's now go over how to actually show these nodes. So we learned how to insert a node, but how do we print out the nodes in the linked list? Well, this is far less complicated than the last one. So here we have a public void show method, and in this method we create some node which is equal to the head. Now we have a while loop that checks, okay, so as long as node.next is not equal to null, we're going to keep on going through and we're going to print out the values of the node. So here we have a system out.println, the node and the data that's in it. And how do we know what the data is? Well, we pass that value inside of the method's parameters. And that will just print out whatever value we put in there. So next we have to update the value of node. So node just simply is equivalent to the node.next. So let's say, for example, we are on this node right here. So it checks, while node.next is not equal to null, so that is true, it's not equal to null, it now prints out the value. So it prints out whatever data is in here. Currently there's nothing there, but we will pass it, those values when we create the objects. And then the node right here is equivalent to the node.next. So that's how we point to the next node. And you might be wondering why we have this system.out.println statement right here outside of the loop. Once we get to the very last node, Java doesn't see this value because this is no longer true because in fact there is nothing pointing to it. This is null. And so this value right here is never seen. And so it just gets out of the for loop. So we have this second print statement so that it prints the data value inside of this node right here, or else this node will never be printed out. It will never be considered. So that is why we have this second value right here, this second print statement right here. Now what if we wanted to count the nodes? So we're pretty much going to use the same code that's in here, but instead we're going to have some count variable which we initialize to 0. So what happens now is it sees the very first node, and so count is equal to 0, and while node.next is not equal to null, so while there is in fact another node in the linked list, we add 1 to count. So initially it was 0, and now we cross that out and it's equal to 1 because there is any other node. And then once we get here, the value is still 1, and that while loop gets run again, and we see that there is in fact another node, so that becomes 2. And now 2 is here, and we see that there is in fact another node, and it just keeps on doing that. And it just keeps on updating by counting the number of nodes. So currently it's on 3, and that's exactly true. We have 1, 2, 3 nodes, and so that's why 3 is there. And then it does that, and so in total here it's going to finally print out 5. Because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nodes. And so again, we have to update the node which is equal to the next node. And this can get very confusing. I know I've said node like 50 million times, and it doesn't really intuitively make sense at first, but when you start to go through this, you'll start to see like just how we process this in English. All we have to do is convert it into Java programming. That's all we're doing right here. And this is in fact intuitive. It might not seem like it at first, but just keep on going through this, and I promise you it will make a lot more sense in the future. And then we update count again, because remember, when we were doing the show method, it's not going to print out the very last node because this while loop was no longer applicable, so we just left the while loop and we never looked at this value right here because there isn't another node after that, so we don't print anything. So same case with this. So while node.next is not equal to null, so let's say for example we're on our tail node, and there is in fact nothing after this node right here, so it won't even consider any of this. It will just opt out. So what happens? This node doesn't get counted into this count variable. So we have to add another count variable outside of the loop, and then we have our print statement. So let's go ahead and create these node objects. So you might be wondering, isn't there a linked list package? Yes, there is a linked list package that we could have just imported, but I wanted to show you the actual implementation of a node and how we can insert it, show it, and then count the number of nodes. Sure, we could have just used the linked list package and used the different functions within that class, but I didn't want to do that because I wanted to show you guys how a linked list actually works and how we can implement it. And so here, linked list is the exact same name as the package, but I just decided to use the same name. It won't have any conflicts with it because I didn't import the package at the very top. If I did import java.util.linkedList, you will see that there's an error because we already created all this, and in order to use the linked list package's add method, we write add, and so that goes away. But we already have a linked list class which I'm already utilizing, so it doesn't really matter. We can name this whatever we want and see everything goes away and it works perfectly. So we call this linked list a list, just for simplicity. That linked list object is created and it's called list. So now remember, in this linked list class, we have the insert method, which we pass in a value called data. Now here, we inserted the value 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now let's go ahead and show every single one of these nodes. And here we have the node method. So this is just going to print out the different nodes that we have inside of our list. So as you can see, it prints out 5, 6, 7, and 8. So it prints out 5 here, 6, 7, and 8. So 5 is our head node and 8 is our tail node. And now we can count the number of nodes. Remember, we have a count nodes method right here, which we're going to use from our objects. So here, this is just going to count the nodes in our linked list. So let's go ahead and comment this out and see what this prints out. So this prints out number of nodes, 4. So we have 0, or we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's exactly what we had right here, minus this value right here. So I really hope this video helped, and if it did, please leave a like and a comment, and I will see you in the next tutorials where we will implement a hash map. Thank you so much for watching.